Welcome to Leaping Larry's Revolutionary Reading Theatre.
Bye, Larry. Go read Lenin.
Oh, that's gonna be fun. That is gonna be a funny thing to listen to later. What the heck is. The red seems darker than normal today. Okay, then. No, I guess it's fine. No, it looks good on stream. Okay. So here we go. We got The Oppressive Contract. This is the last chapter, and there's also an afterword as well by Huey Newton that we'll just read as part of this as well. So we're reading George Jackson's Blood in My Eye, and we are on the final chapter of it. You can find a link to this work for yourself right here. I'll just keep that pinned at the top of the channel until we're done reading. I think we learned John was his lawyer. The Oppressive Contract. First, women and children in a ditch in Vietnam. Ultimately, executions in the civic centers of every look-alike country in this country. Every look-alike county in this country, sorry. Dear John Garassi, as you know, I'm in a unique political position. I have a very nearly closed future. And since I have always been inclined to get disturbed over organized injustice or terrorist practice against the innocents, whatever, I can now say just about what I want. I've always done just about that, without fear of self-exposure. I can only be executed once. No matter what I do, they will always explain me away with the fact of my 11 years in prison and my supposed loss of contact with objective reality. So I rage on Aggressive and Free, the action on April 6th. When I am denied or corrected, I always understand, but rage on. All on the principle that the ideal must be demonstrated, that the oppressed mentality must be taught by example to escape the myth, the hoax that repression can work against the collective consciousness of the commune, and to prove that ideals cannot be killed with violence. So, I'm duty bound to take the occasion of your letter to respond with what an Irishman once termed the sweet taste of sedition. I'll go straight back to our visit and the hour they allowed us to deal with all the years. I took your casual remark concerning the outlaw back to the cell with me, tooled with it a bit, and clarified it in my own hand. I have 100 related questions. I am alive and learning. Outlaws, of course, I thought. Revolution will not be tolerated. It is against the law in a totalitarian corporative state. The revolutionary must certainly reconcile himself with one day becoming an outlaw. Hey ABC, welcome in. When my thoughts turn to the oppressive contract in general, it's the nature of cancer to expand. You've since seen a great deal of it firsthand. US expansionism since World War II. I've only studied it vicariously. But we see the same conclusions. Millions of outlaws in the Union of South Africa, Jordan, Indochina, and here. Summary executions, not of uniformed soldiers, but ordinary people. First, women and children in a ditch in Vietnam, ultimately, executions in the civic centers of every look-alike county in this country. And that's the principal contradiction of monopoly, capital's oppressive contract. The system produces outlaws. It also breeds contempt for the oppressed. Accrual of contempt is its fundamental survival technique. This leads to the excess and destroys any hope of peace, eventually being worked out between the two antagonistic classes, the haves and the have-nots. Coexistence is impossible. Contempt breeds resistance, and resistance breeds brutality. The whole growing in spirals that must either end in the uneconomic destruction of the oppressed or the termination of oppression. History is clearly a long continuum of synthesizing elements. The imbalances of the oppressive contract, ideals so fundamentally contradictory, and forces so mutually exclusive, can only result in the dissolution of the agents of that contradiction. The corollary of the contract is quite simply malignancy. It strikes first of all in the region of the brain. A search for a non-diseased mind throws one hard against one of the greatest historical biological calamities imaginable. Excuses can be made for some workers, blind defense for the system that is victimizing them. Brainwashed by the National Advertising Council's portrait of the silent majority as well off in comparison to the barbarian world. Their mindless behavior can also be explained by their ignorance of labor history. But even the nationalistic conditioning received in massive doses from birth cannot completely explain why man would turn against himself. Even the worker's short-term economic advantage is only a partial explanation. We must look for the root causes and the psychosocial effect for contemptiveness and racism. The huge mass of blue-collar workers seem to be working totally against themselves in their support of a system owned and controlled by a tiny minority. Actually, their contradictory behavior is explained by feelings of loyalty to race, by their identification with the white hierarchy, and by their economic advantage over the oppressed races. They may be oppressed themselves, but in return, they are allowed to oppress millions of others. The economic nature of racism is not simply an aside. Built-in physical features exclude blacks from participation, exclude them forever. These features cannot be changed. It is the relationship that must change. Racism is a fundamental characteristic of monopoly capital. When the white self-congratulatory racist complains that the blacks are uncouth, unlettered, that our areas are run down, not maintained, that we dress with loud tasteless, a thing they now also say about their own children. He forgets that he governs. He forgets that he built the schools that are inadequate, that he has abused his responsibility to use taxes paid by blacks to improve their living conditions, that he manufactured the loud pants and the pointed shoes that destroy and deform the feet. If we are not enough like him to suit his tastes, it's because he planned it that way. We were never intended to be part of his world. It's a silly contradiction for him or us to dwell on the subject of comparisons between the enemy culture and its creation, the subculture. The only way the exploiter can maintain his position is to create differences and maintain deformities. It is the sense of the finality of their exclusion from solid social economic participation that forces our youth away from the crippled family unit into the streets. It causes the excessive importance of meaningless relationships and their prevalence of anti communal behavior, which is a psychosocial response to the loss of and longing for community. The diseased mind. It's slowly spreading throughout the oppressed organism. Even the magnificent savage, the mindless overman, is dying from the almost total anemia. Where is the black man? I see him inseparable from the black female, but where is he now? How he has survived at all is almost beyond any rational explanation. Early, I understood the alternatives of the black situation: assimilation, meaning acceptance of the oppressive contract; ossification, or life below, beyond, outside of society; or revolution. I think maybe Midwestern Mark should read this book. I'm just kidding, they won't care. They won't even see it. But John, I admit to some confusion over the issue of white racism growing out of my experience in prison. My mind has facilitated between the historical references, African feudalism and African communalism. I know that we Africans were the first communists. J. Edgar Hoover calls it primitive communism in one of the glossaries of his anti-people books. Dr. Du Bois dealt with it in Philadelphia Negro, I think. I can't quite remember now. In a positive manner. So I never had any of the really serious hang-ups in accepting revolution. But I think for a while, I sincerely felt that Europeans were not capable of communistic unitarian behavior. I felt this, however, only briefly, since unitarian progressive conduct seems to be a problem for all of us after hundreds of years of steadily centralizing capitalism, and in some areas after several thousand years of hierarchy. I've always understood that the new cultural nationalist attempts to turn the pre-slavery past of African feudalism can only leave the average black man more uncertain and insecure than ever. It is difficult to understand why such negative academic and obscure exoticism exists, when there are definite examples of historical contributions which could be used to analyze and give meaning to our present and our future. The commitment to total revolution must involve an analysis of both the economic motives and the psychosocial motives, which perpetuate the oppressive contract. For the black partisan, national structures are quite simply non-existent. A people without a collective consciousness that transcends national boundaries. Freaks, Afro-Americans, Negroes, even Americans. Triple K. Without the sense of a larger community than their own group, can have no effect on history. Ultimately, they will simply be eliminated from the scene. Without the collective sense of community, without its movement, Bobby Hutton, the shootout on Central, August 7th, and institutions are survival projects that will now grow into infrastructure. We simply never will be an effective force. During the nationalist period of the collective oppressed mentality promoted by the establishment, the movement is frozen, static. This is the level of development favored by the oppressor. The artless, empty ideals of the pseudo nation. Love and respect for a flag, nationalistic song or beat. The fervent belief in a bond or organization which arises out of a thwarted longing for real community. The establishment does everything in its power to ensure that revolutionary rage is redirected into empty outlets which provide pressure releases for desires that could become dangerous if allowed to progress. At this stage in the development of monopoly capitalism, there are two alternatives: aggressive revolutionary activity or calcification. Conservative society, black or white, is decadent society. Due to the absence of creativity and movement, conservative society always burns itself out. Your letter got right at the heart of that principle. The whole ideal of cultural nationalism has been all but smothered now. It was basically contrived out of the loss of community and the terms of the oppressive contract. Coercive conformity and indulgent flexibility to the demands of hierarchy. But we must realize that the oppressive contract cannot be broken as long as any sort of hierarchy exists to perpetuate the sensitized relationships of American tribalism, classism, and racism. Society is rendered impossible by such relationships. The establishment of society through intercommunalism will require that the social contract be completely altered. Clearly, alteration cannot take place unless hierarchy is destroyed. Can we expect the hierarchy to do away with itself? And here's the note, editor's note here: 3 instances of armed black resistance. Lil Bobby Hutton was killed in the aftermath of a prolonged shootout with the Oakland police that involved Eldridge Cleaver. Hutton was shot and killed shortly after emerging from the basement of a house to surrender, naked, as the police had demanded, and with both his hands in the air. Police claim they shot him when he attempted to escape. The shootout on Central is described in a previous note. The significance of August 7th is described in the introduction. The new programs of the Black Panther Party, which include free medical clinics, breakfast programs, cooperative factories, housing, liberation schools, and prison projects. Press X to dote the cops. Yeah. Everybody, please, I want to see a lot of X's in chat. Then, the real undertaking at present is the unconditional freeing of the people. We plunge beyond ideological debate before this immediate task. The black man and the black female must be, as I have mentally ordered things, completely joined together in the act of liberation. I accept my black mama with all her fears for my life that border on hysteria at times. But I also realize that it is the role of the living, of all the innocent, to discover unitary practice and conduct and move against institutions that close on the oppressed. Those who have more regard for their own egos or self-interest than they have for building a united progressive left, and those who abandon community altogether in favor of petty interests are in direct opposition to our real interests. Huey Newton's concept of the revolutionary solidarity of all the oppressed peoples of the world. They are attempting another form of escapism. They're fleeing the objective conditions of their real life and will eventually reach the ultimate contradiction of facing their father or brother or old classmate, comrade or wife over the barrel of a gun. Or they will find themselves in no man's land, cast out by the people, suspected by their crime partners. But regarding their crisis, just passed in the party, as Huey Newton reminds us, there is always a positive side to each negative. The confused resentment and reverse racism of the black partisan will eventually lead to a new, more productive, and creative contribution. Already, we realize that there was no split in the party, only defection. The party has come out of it stronger. We can now bring our strategy and tactics into a realistic conformity with our total objective situation. Recall, we discussed Jonathan and guerrilla strategy in the urban situation at length over that piece of paper with circles and lines, arrows and question marks. I guess now that he is dead and the guilty are safe from the muscle of his mind and arm, it is safe to reveal some of his thoughts and functions within the matrix of the party and movement. In prison, Argot, a man's most trusted companion. Where was this? Oh, right here. Suspected crime partners. The departure from the Black Panther Party of of Eldridge Cleaver and some of his followers in Algeria and New York is what is being referred to here, by the way. He felt, as I did, that the military and political branches, though married in purpose and direction, in these opening stages should function separately from each other for very obvious reasons. In undeveloped countries, the establishment's military strike forces are not more than 30 miles down a dirt road in the provincial capital. They're always within a few moments of strike. The urban guerrilla, however, can mingle with the enemy and remain invisible and invulnerable. In our present situation, there is no contradiction between the military thinking and action and the primacy of politics. The situation allows for such activity as the August 7th movement because it can be accomplished without giving the enemy state forces the pretext they need to move in and destroy the political apparatus. Under the very convenient and much used Anglo-Saxon conspiracy laws. The primacy of politics will continue as long as the military reads, picks up, and works well within the prevailing political matrix. So Jonathan's raid on the military and judiciary that Friday was at once an expression of his own aggressive consciousness and that of the party. It is easy to infer all of this in retrospect that Jonathan was head of a clandestine army which saw the Black Panther Party as its political leader. Operating on his own, he was able to at least attempt to support some of the minimum demands of the people without placing Huey Newton and David Hilliard in jeopardy or loss of movement or death, i.e., persecution in courts. That this is our only recourse at the present level of development is too obvious to even dwell on. It will not be possible, however, in the advanced stages of revolution. Just a glance at the present level of consciousness and the status of the survival infrastructure will reveal the error of Cleaver's analysis that no separation should exist even now between military and political cadre, between military and political action. You know, I sent him a message suggesting that Unitarian conduct depends on a principled discipline and submission to democratic centralism, instead of the egoism that sent him first against his Muslims through the Sacramento Bee Pig Press that time, then against the Peace and Freedom Party, even against the progressive elements of the CP, through his unreasoned attack on the magnificent Angela Davis. Recently, he has even attacked the dedicated, overworked, and brilliant Charles Gary. It seems to be a pattern with the man. You recall the attack he launched against Fidel in Cuba, and those accounts that seemed disparaging of his hosts, which has reached the pig press from here from time to time. My personal message to him was mild. considering that he was in fact leaving his old comrades open to attack again. I sent a letter reminding him that his behavior while in prison was far from exemplary, and had that section of it signed by Ulysses McDaniel and Clifford Jefferson, two of the oldest time in and most respected black partisans in the California concentration camp system. I then listed some of his behavioral patterns since his release, a more complete list than the one I just gave him. That did not indicate that he had changed much. I finally asked him simply to show proof now that he was not a compulsive disruptor or agent provocateur. A very mild request, I feel. He returned with a very scurrilous and profane set of invectives. In short, a piece of vendetta. Tell him that 7,000 miles, the walls of prison, steel, and barbed wire do not make him safe from my special brand of discipline. Tell him that the dragon is coming. The substructured prison movements are gaining momentum. My trial is set for early August 1971. There will be hearings in between the course. If they are at all like the last, you'll get to see my special bastardized style of martial arts. I'm working hard to stay in form. I wasn't at my best at the last showing. I'll clean them all next time they attack. Attend, let me see your style. Your comrade in arms, he who does not fear the death of 1,000 cuts, will dare unseat the Emperor. George Jackson. There you go. That's the work. Those are all the words of George Jackson there. But here we do have an afterword as well. This is an afterword by Huey P. Newton. So here we go. Let's do this too. Afterword. Statement by Huey P. Newton, servant of the people, Black Panther Party at the Revolutionary Memorial Service for George Jackson. Power to the people. Power to our fallen comrade, Brother George Jackson, member of the Black Panther Party. First, because many people are wondering, I would like to explain the connection between Brother George Jackson and the Black Panther Party. When I went to prison in 1967, I met George. Not physically, but through his ideas, his thoughts, and words. He was at Soledad prison at the time. I was in California Penal Colony. George was a legendary figure throughout the prison system, where he spent most of his life. I met George through his spirit. Shortly after learning about him, I got word through the prison grapevine that he wanted to join the Black Panther Party. At his request, he was made a member of the People's Revolutionary Army with the rank of General and Field Marshal. He was put in charge of the prison recruiting and was asked to go on with his life as a revolutionary example, which was the most important thing that one could ever do, because that cannot be killed. I say that the legendary figure is also a hero. George Jackson was my hero. He set a standard for prisoners, political prisoners, and people. He showed the love, the strength, the revolutionary fervor that's characteristic of any soldier for the people. He inspired prisoners, whom I later encountered, and put his ideas into practice, and so his spirit became a living thing. Today I say that although George's body has fallen, his spirit goes on, because his ideas live. And we will see that these ideas stay alive, because they'll be manifested in our bodies and in these young Panthers' bodies who are our children. So it's a true saying that there will be revolution from one generation to the next. This was George's legacy, and he will go on. He will go on into immortality because we believe that the people will win. We know the people will win as they advance generation upon generation. What kind of standard did George Jackson set? First, he was a strong man, without fear, determined, full of love, strength, and dedication to the people's cause. He lived a life that we must praise. No matter how he was oppressed, no matter how wrongly he was done, he still kept the love for the people. And this is why he felt no pain in giving up his life for the people's cause. The state itself sets the stage for the kind of contradiction or violence that occurs in our world, particularly in the prisons. The ruling circle of the United States has terrorized the world. The state has the audacity to say they have the right to kill. They say they have the death penalty and it's legal. But I say, by the laws of nature, that no death penalty can be legal. It's only cold-blooded murder. It spurs all sorts of violence because every man has a contract with himself to keep himself alive at all costs. Legally, the state can confine someone subject to correction at a later date. Even if the state does wrong, it could give itself the semblance of legality by leaving open the possibility of rectification. But, of course, with the death penalty, with the kind of violence that we see in our community, where the police are also the executioners, we don't have this chance of negotiation. They have the audacity to say that people should deliver a life to them without a struggle. None of us can accept that George Jackson had every right to do everything possible to preserve his life, and the life of his comrades, the life of the people. This is actually Huey Newton right here speaking. Even after his death, George Jackson is a legendary figure and a hero. Even the oppressor realizes this. To cover their murder, they say that George Jackson killed 5 people. 5 oppressors. And wounded 3 in the space of 30 seconds. You know, sometimes I like to overlook the fact that this would be physically impossible. But after all, George Jackson is my hero. And I would like to think that it was possible. I would be very happy thinking that George Jackson had the strength, because that would have made him a Superman. Of course, my hero would have to be a Superman. And we will raise our children to be like George Jackson, to live like George Jackson, and to fight for freedom as George Jackson fought for freedom. George's last statement, the example of his conduct at San Quentin on that terrible day, left a standard for political prisoners and for a prisoner society of racist, reactionary America. He left a standard for the liberation armies of the world. He showed us how to act. He demonstrated how the unjust would be criticized by the weapon. And this will certainly be true, because the people will take care of that. George also once said that the oppressor is very strong, and he might beat him down. He might beat us down to our very knees. He might crush us to the ground. But it will be physically impossible for the oppressor to go on. At some point, his legs will get tired. And when his legs get tired, then George Jackson and the people will tear his kneecaps off. But first, the state sets the scene for such violence, you see. And some people say that we can't get rid of this kind of physical conflict with more of the same. Well, I would take issue with this. We can use that example of the oppressor stomping George Jackson down to his knees. He can't go on. We will retaliate with violence against his violence. It's true that we'll be hurt by his violence, but we're determined not to let him wipe out the people. We know that we cannot wipe out the people. We know that he cannot wipe out the people because we will fight on. We will tear his legs off. We will tear his head off, and we'll take the example of George Jackson. In the name of love and in the name of freedom, with love as our guide, we'll slit the throat of anyone who threatens the people and our children. We'll do it in the name of peace, if this is what we are forced to do. Because as soon as it's over, then we can have the kind of world where violence no longer exists. So we will be very practical. We won't make statements and believe the things the prison officials say. There are incredible stories about one man killing 5 people in 30 seconds. We will go on and live very realistically. There will be pain and much suffering in order for us to develop. But even in their suffering, I see a strength growing. I see the example that George set living on. We know that all of us will die someday. But we know that there are 2 kinds of death. The reactionary death and the revolutionary death. One death is significant and the other is not. George certainly died in a significant way, and his death will be very heavy. While the deaths of the ones that fell that day in San Quentin will be lighter than a feather. Even those who support them now will not support them in the future. Because we're determined to change their minds. We'll change the minds, or else, in the people's name, we'll have to wipe them out thoroughly, wholly, absolutely, and completely. All power to the people. In memory of George Jackson. Last part got me all choked up. Here you go, comrades. We're done. That's George Jackson. Remember, you can get the whole read on my YouTube, as well as right here on my Twitch as well, if you prefer not to go through YouTube.